My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.
Are you a Michael Jackson fan?
Yes, I am. I wouldn't say I'm a diehard fan. I'm more of a casual fan, but I have been a fan since I was a little kid. You know, I loved Man in the Mirror, Heal the World, Black or White. Those are the sort of the songs that really inspired me when I was a young child because I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And it's kind of, so when those allegations came out in 1993, it was very jarring for me because if you would have asked me to line up 100 celebrities and tell me which one's most to least likely to be a pedophile, I would have put Michael Jackson at the end of the line because there was so much empathy and compassion in his music and in his interviews and in his whole persona. And so, when I grew up, I didn't know much about the allegations back then. And even in 2005, I didn't really follow it. I was too busy. But after he died, I looked into it and I was just like, oh my God, this is, even though my intuition sort of told me he was innocent, I didn't understand the scope of what happened to him or the details. And so I just felt obligated to document it and write about it in a way that would be easier for other people to understand.
Let me quote a line from one of his songs. Speculate to break the one you hate, circulate the lie you confiscate, assassinate and mutilate.
Yeah, it's brilliant, actually. I think, and it's so spot on, because that is how the media operates. They have, because the media is really owned by a handful of organizations or individuals. And so, when you say speculate to break the one you hate, you don't even necessarily need to spread lies. You just need to spread innuendo and gossip and rumor. And that's enough to break an individual. It's enough to destroy their reputation. It's enough to psychologically damage them. It's a real way to sort of go after your enemies. He said later in that same song, slander, you say it's not a sword, but with your pen you torture men, which is another brilliant poetic line. And it's just, I don't know, I just think those lyrics are incredible. And then circulate the lie you confiscate. It sort of speaks to how fast, rumors or allegations that are unbased can spread, because you can put something on the media and it can spread globally within minutes, within the hour. So how does the truth catch up to that? How do you debunk an allegation? The media can put an allegation out there, within an hour, the whole globe knows about it. And to debunk something takes time because you have to go through it minutely, you have to go through it in detail, and then you typically don't get the same audience. I can debunk the Michael Jackson allegations, but I'm not going to get a global audience to speak to everyone. And I can't debunk it in a minute either. It takes time to debunk it. So he's right. They can just circulate any lie just like that.
So your book, Michael Jackson, The Man, the Music, the Conspiracy, you wrote in 2024. Why are we talking about Michael Jackson now in 2026?
Yeah, so I think it's just, he is such a good window into how media works. I think I gained such a perspective, when I was young. And, because when I was a kid, I asked my dad, why is the media so mean to Michael? Why are they so harsh to Michael? And he's like, it appears like those in power don't really like him, was kind of his response. And I didn't really know what that meant, or because I didn't really understand how solidified or how consolidated media was. But you have to look at it Michael was competition to the media, right? Because when he spoke, the whole entire world listened. He had fans in Africa and South America and Asia, and Europe, all over the world. So when he had a message to say, and especially when he had a message to say through music, because music is a very, very powerful medium. It's much more powerful, I think, than any kind of other medium in terms of evoking emotion. And people will listen to a song over and over and over, and it'll sit in their subconscious. So even though he passed away in 2009, his music is still here. So he can't speak on a topic, but he's still competition to the media in a way through his music. Because if you listen to the song you just mentioned, Tabloid Junkie, that song was actually about the JFK assassination. And it kind of speaks to how the media, character assassinated. They didn't just JFK was not just physically assassinated, he was also character assassinated. And he has, Michael Jackson has so many other songs that speak to so many controversial issues and that really unite humanity, right? And those at the top don't necessarily want a unified society. Divide and conquer is like the oldest tactic in the book. So I don't know if you want people listening to someone like Michael Jackson, like over and over and over, because, I ended up writing a book about John F. Kennedy as well. And I think part of the reason is I wanted to clear his name sort of in the way I wanted to clear Michael Jackson's name. And I think part of the reason that I had it in my subconscious that he was character assassinated is because I heard Michael sing it over and over and over. And so I think because of the power of the medium of music, he's still a threat in a certain kind of way, even all these years later.
Like many others, I didn't really listen closely to lyrics of music. I just enjoyed the music. But there was that one song, I think we all know, that we all made us ask questions. That all I want to say is that they don't really care about us. And yeah. I remember thinking, who's he talking about?
Yeah, because that is the question, who is they, right? And that is an incredibly powerful song. And I think it's also important that he says all I want to say beforehand. So, because that song came out after the allegations. So in a way, it's a sort of response to the allegations. And he's almost saying like, all I'm trying to say is they don't care about us. And look at how my reputation is being destroyed, how I'm being attacked, how everyone is going after me. And all I'm trying to say is the truth, which is those at the top don't really care about the rest of humanity and are trying to use divide and conquer tactics to separate people. And so I think that the initial words to that phrase you just said are really important, not just that they don't care about us part, but the all I want to say part.
There's basically two aspects to Michael Jackson. It's pre-1993 and post-1993.
Yeah, so I think he started to become... He was a little bit outspoken in the 80s. I think Man in the Mirror was a song that had a lot of impact. He did the We Are the World. He wrote that song, which I don't think a lot of people know that he wrote We Are the World. Those are very unifying songs, but not necessarily controversial songs.
Sort of
but
humanitarian.
Yeah, humanitarian. And in 1991, when he came out with the Black or White album, I think he started to get a little bit more controversial. Like in his Heal the World song, he had all these children playing, including from Israel and Palestine, getting along. And when the soldiers and the adults saw the children playing, they laid down their weapons. So imagine that, where you're teaching the next generation of Israeli and Palestinian children to play together and to lay down their weapons. So I think that in itself, again, is very humanitarian, but it's also very threatening in a way.
And relevant
right?
still.
To people who want, and relevant still for people who want that division. And then when he did the Black or White video, at the end, he does the Black Panther dance, which I didn't understand as a child. But, the Black Panther dance, a lot of people say you refer to the Black Panther Party from the 1960s, late 1960s, which was a very anti-imperialist party, which really spoke out against American actions in Vietnam, actions at home. And it really spoke out against American imperialism. And so in the Black or White video, there's sort of three sections, right? There's the first section where you see sort of a family that's sort of absorbed in like sports. The husband's absorbed in watching sports. The wife is absorbed in Gossip magazine. And he's kind of showing you kind of how oblivious the average suburban home is. Like they're kind of living in their own world. They don't know what's going on outside their world. And then the second half of the next section of the video, he's sort of dancing all over the planet with all these different cultures and people. And he's sort of showing the utopian version of the world, isn't like we can all get along, it doesn't matter if you're black or white. And then the end, he transforms to a Black Panther, and he does this sort of like very violent dance, which was censored from later TV broadcasts. And the hotel sign that falls at the end of it is called Royal Arms, which I think stands for like imperial weapons, right? Because this is the Black Panther, the anti-imperialist party. You see the Royal Arms Hotel fall at the end. And then at the very end, it zooms out in the end, and Bart Simpson's watching it, and Homer Simpson says, "Turn off that garbage." So I think he's sort of showing how the pain of people who are suffering, from imperialism, from poverty, from whatever, how their pain, you can just shut off and censor their pain, is kind of what happens at the end when Homer's just like, shut that garbage off. So it's like the Black Panther is trying to express their pain and frustration. And that typical suburban home is just like, I don't want to see it. And so I think it was, that was 1991. And so that's already, he's kind of getting into controversial topics, and maybe it's not as explicit. Like, I didn't get it as a kid. I didn't understand the Black Panther dance as a kid like I do now. But it still was getting into that stage where it's not a big leap to go from that to then they don't care about us after the allegations.
Yes, and then 1993 happened.
Yes, 1993 happened. So yeah, at the start of 1993, he performed at the Super Bowl, which I still remember that performance. You know, when I was a kid there, like a preteen, I absolutely loved it. He performed Heal the World. He got all these people together, again, from all these different cultures, sort of singing together. And he spoke and he said, we need to remake the planet into a haven of goodness and understanding and joy, you know, and compassion for others. So again, very humanitarian, very unifying. And then 6 months later, the allegations come out against him. And so what kind of happened is his car broke down or ran out of gas, and he met this family who he sort of befriended. And this lady had a young son and a daughter. And so they started hanging out with Michael. And then when her ex-husband got a hold that they were hanging out, so her ex-husband paid no attention to his son at that point. He owed tons of back child support. Like, he wasn't in the picture at all, basically. But when the kids started hanging out with Michael and the mother started hanging out with Michael, he wanted to get in on that, right? And at first, Michael was very friendly to him and whatnot, but I think MJ didn't really like him, so he tried to separate from Evan Chandler was his name. And so Evan started to act jealous. So June's new husband, who she was separated from by this point, David Schwartz, taped a phone call that he had with Evan Chandler because they were concerned about Evan because Evan was starting to act really jealous and just erratic, and they weren't sure what he was going to do, you know. And he's like, why did Michael stop calling me? He didn't have to stop calling me. So he almost sounds like a jilted ex in a way, like he's upset that Michael's not talking to him. And he said, you know, he didn't say he was going to accuse Michael of molesting his son, but he kind of implied it. You know, he says, this man has no idea what's going to happen to him. I'm going to destroy all of them, Michael, June, Jordy, which is, again, all three of them, not just Michael. You know, he's kind of really bitter at all of them, you know. And he says, everything's going according to a certain plan that isn't just mine. Other people are involved. I just have to set this thing in motion, and this man will not sell another record. So you can already see here, there's sort of some kind of targeted attempt to go after Michael. Like, we don't know who else Evan was involved with. We don't know who else he was talking to, but he's on tape saying other people are involved and that everything's going according to a certain plan that isn't just his. Those are his words, Evan Chandler's words. And so what happened then is David Schwartz took that tape to Anthony Pellicano, which was Michael's private investigator, and they asked Jordy, you know, is Michael molesting you? What's going on here? And Jordy said, no, nothing's going on. Like, my father just wants money or something. Like, and so in any case, Evan kept asking June if he could spend a week with Jordy. And so June eventually let Evan spend a week with Jordan. And what happened then is, like, Evan refused to give Jordan back to his mother. So Jordan ended up staying with his father for like a whole month because Evan wasn't giving him back. And then what happened is June went to court and she's like, I want my son back, you know? And then that day when Evan was supposed to give the son back, he took the son to a psychologist. He had previously gone to a psychologist with a hypothetical scenario. And he was like, how do I report abuse without liability to the parent? So, like, in other words, how does it get reported and I don't get in trouble if it's false, right? And the psychologist says, well, if a child reports it to me, I'm obligated to report it to the Department of Children and Family Services. So then what happened is, like, when Evan was supposed to give Jordan back to June, he instead took Jordan to a psychologist. At that point, Jordan told the psychologist that he had been molested. That then went to the Department of Children and Family Services, which went to the police, which then blew up in, like, the global media, like, right away, just completely blew up in the global media. And so Michael responded, and he wanted to press extortion charges against Evan, because what was happening this whole time is, so Evan had written Robin Hood Men in Tights. He was a dentist, but he was trying to get into the screenplay business. And so he was trying to, and Michael was, like, working on some film production company with Sony. He had gotten like $40 million from Sony to work on this film production company. And Evan wanted to write scripts. So Evan went to Michael This is before they went to the psychiatrist, or after he went with the hypothetical, but before Jordy went. He went to Michael and he said, can you give me a script, a movie deal? And he wanted $20 million to write screenplays. And so Michael's attorneys felt that this was an extortion attempt and they wanted to make record of the extortion attempt. So they first went back to Evan's lawyers and said, we'll give you a $1 million script deal for 3 scripts. And Evan's lawyer came back, said, that's not nearly enough. We want 20 million. And then Pelicano, or whoever was doing the negotiations, went back to Barry Rothman, who was Evan Chandler's lawyer, and said, we'll give you just 1 script for $350,000. And at that point, Rothman knew they were not serious about negotiating because their second offer was a lot lower than their first offer. So this was all happening kind of at the same time that June was trying to get Jordy back. And so it's just the whole drama. But in any case, at the end of the day, Evan took Jordan to the psychiatrist, and then it blew up in the media. Michael went after him for extortion charges, which the police didn't take seriously at all. They didn't even interview them on the extortion case. They basically didn't follow up on it at all. So Rothman took himself off as Chandler's lawyer because of the extortion charges. And then Chandler went to a civil attorney. So this is really important to understand. So now the police are investigating Michael. So there's a pending criminal investigation against Michael Jackson. Evan goes to a new attorney, Larry Feldman, and files a civil lawsuit. So now you've got 2 court cases simultaneously against Michael Jackson. You've got a criminal investigation that the police is working on, and you have a civil lawsuit that Evan Chandler has pushed against Michael. And what's happening is that Michael's lawyers went to the judge 4 times and said, please delay or stay the civil case until the criminal investigation is complete. It's not fair for our client to give a civil deposition under oath on a pending criminal matter, because that's the same thing like the defense going first and the prosecution going second. Because they're like, if Michael goes under oath and he says, I was here and there and everywhere, then the police can just say, well, he didn't molest him at this time, he molested him at that time, and they can completely craft their case around what he's already said under oath. So they kept going back to the judge saying, can we delay this civil case until the criminal is complete? But Evan Chandler's lawyer said, no, they asked for like an expedited civil trial and said, we need this right away. The criminal investigation might take years. Jordy might forget. We need to proceed ASAP with the civil case. And the judge agreed with them. So he didn't agree with Michael's lawyers. He said, we're going to expedite the civil trial. So they scheduled the civil trial for March 1994. And they were supposed to depose Michael on January 1994, right? And so the police interviewed all these people because the police investigation is going on. They can't find a single piece of evidence, a single credible witness, absolutely nothing. So what they decide is that they're going to do a body search of Michael. So they have him get naked. Yes, they take photos of his private parts, video of his private parts or whatnot, completely just humiliating, degrading. And then what's really interesting is then Feldman on the civil case puts in a motion and says, we want to give Michael Jackson's attorneys 3 options. Either they hand over the photos to us, either they do another body search, or we bar them from the civil trial. So why on earth are Chandler's lawyers trying to bar the photos from the civil trial if there was a match? And we know today there wasn't a match because Jordy said Michael was circumcised. His autopsy said he's not circumcised. And also if there had been a match, they would have arrested Michael. They never arrested him. And later, during the grand jury, they asked his mother if Michael had surgery on his genitalia, which is another indication that there was no match in the description. But in any case, so the day of Michael's deposition, which was like late January 1994, Michael's lawyers settled the case because they're like, Michael, you cannot give a civil deposition under oath. Like, this is a pending criminal matter. The prosecution has to go first. It's not your turn to go. They need to go. And so that's why the case was settled. It is not clear who paid the settlement. A representative from Transamerica Insurance Company said they offered to pay the settlement. Whether they actually did or not, I'm not 100% sure. It's not clear in the documentation. So it may or may not have been paid by Michael's insurance company or may not have been paid by Michael. I'm not sure. But the main reason for the settling the case was to avoid that civil deposition and to let the criminal continue.
Can I just jump in? I'm so sorry for interrupting, but that settlement, that out-of-court settlement is what also triggered huge amounts of speculation.
Yes, it damaged his reputation severely. And I think that's why it's so important because the way the media told the story is he bought his way out of jail. But what they don't tell is that it was Michael's lawyers who went to the judge over and over and said, hold this civil case, let the criminal go first. So it's Chandler's lawyers that are trying to make the civil go first, not Michael's lawyers. So if he was trying to buy, first of all, if he was trying to buy his way out of prison, he would have given Evan the $20 million film deal that Evan wanted back in the summer, which he, instead of doing that, he let Evan accuse him of child molestation. He let this whole thing go out in the press, and even then he could have been like, okay, let's let the civil case go first. No, he wasn't like that. He's like, let's do the criminal first. So you can clearly see who's pushing for the money and who's pushing for a proper investigation. But you're right, that's not at all how the media reported it. The way the media reported it is he paid money to get out of this. But you can't, a civil and a criminal case have absolutely nothing to do with each other. You can't buy off a criminal case. And actually, after they did that settlement in January, later that spring, they did 2 grand juries, not one, but 2, one in Los Angeles and one in Santa Barbara. And then both grand juries refused to indict Michael Jackson. And they say, you can indict a ham sandwich, like an indictment is the easiest thing in the world to get. But both grand juries refused to indict him because there was no evidence. So even from a criminal perspective, it did go in front of 2 juries. And they both refused to even issue an indictment, let alone a guilty verdict. And so, yeah, it has been misreported. And unfortunately, from a legal perspective, his lawyers absolutely gave him the right advice. Because he had, and actually the California laws changed as a direct result of the Michael Jackson case because it was so incredibly unfair. After that, the law changed and you could no longer push a civil case in front of a criminal after that Michael Jackson case. So even like the California court systems agreed with how ridiculous this whole scenario was and how unfair it was to Michael Jackson. And so I think people need to understand that broader context to understand why he settled. And it's not just, I wanted to pay my way out of prison. And it's not even clear if he paid it. And even if he did, it's understandable if he did, but that's not clear either as to who paid the settlement.
And I remember there was that leaked phone call in which Michael said that they were coming after him. And this is where the anti-Semitic charges came from, because he said the Jews or something to that effect. And he even used that in his lyrics. What was that one song? I've got it here somewhere.
They don't care about us.
Oh, yeah, it's in that one where he says, Jew me, sue me, everybody do me, kick me, kike me, don't you black or white me.
Jackson promised several months ago to revise the lyrics to his song, They Don't Care About Us, lyrics many called anti-Semitic.
Last year, he angered Jewish groups when he sang these words.
Do me, sue me, everybody do me, kick me, kite me, don't you black or white me.
I'm shocked. Jew me, sue me, kick me, kike me. Those are the words that he told us that he would never use again.
This is something like leeches. I was so tired of it. They start out the most popular person in the world, make a lot of money, big house, cars, and everything, end up with penniless. It is conspiracy. The Jews do it on purpose.
Yes, and that was extremely controversial, and they actually censored those lyrics. So I think the first version of the CD or the tape that went out had the uncensored lyrics. And then, there's a huge uproar, and Sony made him go in and record sounds over those lyrics. And I actually went to like one of these studio sessions that the people that worked on Michael's music give from time to time. And the guy that actually put the sounds over it said Michael Jackson came back to him like 5 separate times and said, make it louder, make it louder, make it louder. So Michael wanted it to be very egregious and very obvious that they were censoring those lyrics. And, his studio people said he was absolutely pissed that they were forcing him to censor his lyrics.
I mean, but he was rightfully angry.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you listen to the History album, he is furious. Like that whole entire album from beginning to end is just anger. It's, absolutely furious, that whole album. And you can, he's singing about other things like Tabloid Junkie is about, talks about JFK, they don't care about us, talks about, the general sort of divide and conquer that our society lives under. Money talks about the greed, how our world is run by greed and how you can buy anybody to do anything you want. And
that one lyric from Tabloid Junkie, you mentioned JFK. JFK exposed the CIA, truth be told, the grassy knoll.
Yeah, so for those that aren't familiar with the JFK assassination, the grassy knoll is where a lot of people think a second shooter was stationed. So, before that, Michael says, "Who's the next for you to resurrect?" Because he said when you said in your opening, "assassinate and mutilate." So, I interpret those lyrics as, okay, assassinate JFK, mutilate his image, and then resurrect him as something other than what he was, which is sort of, instead of he was, because he was a really conscientious, hardworking public servant, who was working on behalf of humanity. And they resurrected him as this dopey, like self-absorbed playboy. And then Michael's saying, well, truth be told, the grassy knoll. So if you want to know who the real JFK is, go look at the grassy knoll, basically.
Well, anybody who's done any kind of homework into that will know that Oswald was a patsy.
Yeah, and he actually, Michael Jackson in his video, They Don't Care About Us. So that video is also brilliant. There's two videos, but one of them's in a prison. And he's got these like images playing on TVs behind him. And one of the images is Lee Harvey Oswald getting shot by Jack Ruby. So he did have actually Oswald in his They Don't Care About Us video. And that video is also really interesting because he's in a prison cell and he's got these TVs with what kind of looks like an all-seeing eye around them. So it's almost like it's sort of portraying that we're all sort of living in this confinement in kind of way. And we can't really escape from this like confinement that we're living in. So I thought the video, sort of the symbolism of that video was brilliant.
I actually think that the symbolism also on Dangerous was particularly interesting. I've been trying to work out that cover for years.
Yeah, I can't. I do. It's got a lot on it from what I remember the cover. Right? It's so much like in that cover. There is a lot of messages because, like I said, with Black or White, I didn't understand the Black Panther dance. I didn't understand what it meant that the Royal Arms Hotel fell. I didn't understand any of that as a kid. It wasn't until much later that I rewatched it. I was like, oh wow, he's actually saying a lot in his music that I did not pick up on at all. Everybody
got him wrong.
Yes, I think it's. I think he is the most misrepresented person, probably certainly in our lifetime. Like I can't imagine anybody who's been more misrepresented in the public sphere than he has.
But the thing, Monika, is he didn't really make it difficult. He was very odd.
Yes, no, I do agree with that. I think, and he also didn't like to speak much. He liked to speak through his music rather than give interviews, and I think that also hurt. But I think just to give some sort of context in here, so I think it was 1984, he had these horrible burns on his scalp, which I believe, if it didn't lead to his vitiligo, it severely exacerbated, because one of the leading causes of vitiligo is burns. So he had these severe burns, which he suffered from for the rest of his life because he couldn't grow hair anymore. So they tried to like repair the burns with surgery and it made it even more painful, which then got him addicted to painkillers. So he did have from off and on and during the rest of his life painkiller addictions. But it also, I believe, either led to or exacerbated an existing case of vitiligo, because you notice it's after those after those burns that he starts to lose the pigmentation of his skin. And he also starts to have a lot of plastic surgery during that time. And I think part of it, I think there's a lot of reasons he probably had plastic surgery. One is like he was made fun of by his father a lot. And, he's in the public spotlight. He's really sensitive. He's really insecure. He's an artist. He wants to look good on stage. But I think it was also a reaction to the vitiligo and the loss of his hair because of the burns. Because that changes your appearance a lot. And so you try to respond to that in like ways that you think you can, at least in some ways, those things he couldn't control, but at least the plastic surgery to some extent he could control. So I think it was partly reactions to those things. So I think people underestimate just the effect that those burns had on the rest of his life and what that led to. So it did lead to painkillers, it did, I think, lead to more plastic surgery probably. Which, and again, go ahead.
No, sorry, I interrupted, but I was going to say it didn't help that the media amplified that weirdness.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So the media tried to make it look like he's intentionally, hates his race, like he wants to intentionally bleach his skin. that he's just, wacko jacko. That was kind of the term, that the tabloids and really the mainstream press pushed as well. And they would always try to find the worst possible photos of him, and put them on TV. And so they absolutely tried to amplify his weirdness. And he was different, he was unique. He didn't have a normal childhood. I think he left children for two reasons. I think one is like he didn't have a childhood, but two, like he loved creation. He loved nature. He loved children. And I think he got his inspiration to write music from creation. Like he would sit in a tree and write music. So that's like kind of the essence of nature, right? Just sitting in a tree. And if you look at Neverland, it's so beautiful. It's just 3,000 acres of nature. And so I think he was different as well.
Something else that came through his, I think it was History album, where he didn't only point out the problems with the media and the establishment, but also his audience. What's that one line? And you don't have to read it. To buy it is to feed it. So why do we keep fooling ourselves?
Yeah, so that's the Tabloid Junkie song. And that also is absolutely brilliant. So he's accusing a media of, slander and lies and all this, but he's also accusing the audience and saying, why are you listening to it? To read it is to sanctify it. So why are you sanctifying what the media is saying? You're validating their lies. So why are you doing it? Like you said, his lyrics are, why do we keep fooling ourselves? Why do we keep falling for propaganda? Why don't we question these media narratives? And so he's right. It is the media's fault for propagandizing people, but it's also the public's fault for being so gullible to propaganda.
Do you remember when he broke from Sony?
Yeah, so he actually, just as he finished his final commitment to Sony, or one of his final commitments, which is, I think, a music video, that's the day they arrested him in 2003 for child molestation. So he was originally accused in 1993. That criminal case went nowhere. The civil case was settled. So in 2003, there was another allegation that came out as a result of a documentary, and we can go into that if you want. But
yes, please
basically, so basically there was this documentary, Leaving Neverland. And so, as you said, Michael's image was a complete mess, right? People thought he was strange and weird, and he had painkiller issues, plastic surgery issues and whatnot. So he wanted to clarify his image and show his true self. And so he got conned into doing this documentary with Martin Bashir, which turned into a complete hit piece, a very manipulatively edited hit piece. And in that documentary, he's seen with a boy, Gavin Arvizo, and he's holding the boy's hand. And it came out later in court that Martin Bashir asked Michael to hold Gavin's hand while they were filming. And Gavin was a child who had cancer. He met Michael through Michael's hairstylist because her son was in the same dance class, I think, as Gavin. And anyway, she felt bad for the kid because he had cancer, so she got the family hooked up with Michael, and they met. And this kid, and Bashir said, show me some kids, that you just average kids that you met, that you've helped with, their cancer treatments or whatnot. And so Michael agreed to have Gavin appear in this documentary with them. And so after that, and in the documentary, so Gavin and his brother begged Michael to sleep in his room. They're like, can we please sleep in your, one night, this was just one night, can we please sleep in your room? Can we please sleep in your room? And Michael was kind of uneasy about it, so he asked his assistant, and he had his children sleep in the room as well, and he gave the two boys the bed, and Michael and I think his children and his assistant slept on the floor. But in the documentary, Michael says, you always give the best to the company, but they kind of cut it up in a way where Michael says, the most loving thing you can do is share your bed. So they kind of implied that they slept in the bed together. But what he meant is what he said later, which is you give the best to the company, right? You kind of give your bed and then you sleep on the floor is what happened. But the media chopped that up, and it just was a complete firestorm again. Everyone started speculating that Michael was molesting Gavin. And this was filmed somewhere in 2002. And this documentary aired in early February 2003. And so Gavin hadn't seen Michael since they filmed. And then so the media starts hounding Gavin's family. And Gavin reaches out to Michael and says, can we spend a few weeks at Neverland until the media hoopla dies down? They're at our door, they're hounding us. And Michael's like, sure, whatever. Neverland's 3,000 acres. It's got multiple guest cottages. You can stay on the property. And so because of this media firestorm, the police start investigating Michael for possibly molesting Gavin. Department of Children and Family Services start investigating him for possibly molesting Gavin. Gavin's like head of school, principal or whatever, asks him if he's being molested. He says no. This family, according to Michael's staff who testified in court, started to act entitled to Michael's money and Michael's property, and they were sort of rude. They weren't respectful of the property, and Michael eventually kicked them out in early March. So they were there for about maybe 4, 5, 6 weeks. He kicks them off the property in early March. And then, so they change their story and say, no, he did molest us. They first go to a civil attorney and say, the same civil attorney actually that won the Chandler lawsuit in 1993. And the attorney tells them, well, the laws have changed. We can't pursue a civil case. You have to work with the police first. And when the police are done, then you can come back to us for a civil case. So come November, the police arrest Michael Jackson. Now, let me get to this. So in their arrest sheet, they accuse him of molesting Gavin 5 times. Gavin says he was molested 5 times. And then his brother says he saw Gavin molested an additional 2 times. So but basically in the charge sheet, they say Gavin says Michael Jackson molested me 5 times between the dates of, it was like February 3rd or something like that to March 10th, something like that. That's on the charge sheet. But when they start doing so they arrested him in late 2003, the trial's not till 2005. So as they're doing their investigation through 2004, they run into a few issues. One is they find a videotape, because Michael taped a rebuttal documentary to this Bashir hit piece. And our Arvizo didn't appear in the rebuttal, but they did videotape for the rebuttal. So on February 20th, they're on videotape praising Michael Jackson. They're just completely laughing at and making fun of the insinuations that Bashir made in his documentary about Gavin being molested. The police find this videotape and they're like, oh crap, this kid says he's being molested. We've got video of him laughing about the idea that he's molested. So let us add an imprisonment charge to Michael's charges. So he wasn't just charged with molestation. He was charged with trying to imprison this family because the police were saying Michael forced them to make this video. Even though when you watch the video, there's tons of chit chat in between filming, it's obvious, they think these allegations are a joke. But in any case, the police have to come up with some kind of excuse for this video. So they say Michael imprisoned this family and forced them to make this video. But then they find an ironclad alibi for the early parts of February. So Michael Jackson could not have molested Gavin before this video. So by the time they get to court, they claim that the molestation started after the video, on February 20th, and that Gavin was molested only twice, not 5 times. So the trial is a completely different case than the one they charged him under, because they charged him under 5 molestations starting February 3rd. They go to court with 2 molestations starting after February 20th. And so now you look at this timeline. This documentary airs in early February. The entire world is speculating that Michael is molesting this child. The police are investigating him. Department of Children and Family Services are investigating him. And then Michael, after all of this, decides, hey, for the very first time, I'm going to decide that I'm going to molest this child. Because the first molestation, according to the police's own timeline, started after February 20th. That would literally make him the dumbest human being on the entire planet. Who starts molesting someone they are already under investigation for molesting? And I don't think a single mainstream media outlet ever once explained the timeline, ever once explained that the charges completely changed between the original charges and what came out in court. And, I think it was the grand jury foreman, I think, said in an interview, what kid doesn't know the difference between being molested 5 times and 2 times? Right. How do you change your story that drastically? And of course, the Arvizos had massive credibility issues. They had sued JCPenney for sexual molestation because Gavin got picked up for shoplifting. And his mother claimed that JCPenney security guards molested her. And JCPenney was fed up and didn't want anything to do with them. So they gave him $150,000 to go away. And I think that's what they were hoping with Michael Jackson, that Michael Jackson would get fed up like JCPenney and be like, here's some money, just leave me alone. But that didn't happen in the Michael Jackson case. It went the criminal route instead. And so and there's so many other credibility issues they have that I won't get into, but the case was just such a joke. I don't think a single media outlet explained the timeline.
And an important figure was Macaulay Culkin, actually.
Yes, yes. So he did. So their case was so weak that the prosecution tried to come up with what they called prior bad acts. And so they brought on these witnesses who had been fired by Michael Jackson, who had sold stories to the tabloids, who actually had been countersued who tried to sue Michael Jackson for wrongful termination and had been countersued. And so they owed like over $1 million to Michael Jackson because the judge sided with Michael Jackson that they took property from Neverland or something. So these are really shady characters. In any case, they testified that they had seen Macaulay Culkin molested. And the prosecution didn't bother to go ask Macaulay Culkin, were you molested? And so Tom Mesereau, Michael's defense attorney, brought Culkin. And it wasn't just Culkin, it was Brett Barnes and also Wade Robson. We can get to Robson later if you want.
And also that guy from, was it NSYNC or his brother? Carter? No,
he was a choreographer for Britney Spears. I think that's who you're thinking of, Wade Robson.
No. I'm thinking of one of the was it NSYNC? I forget now. One of the brothers. He died. He died, but he was on video saying that Michael didn't.
Oh, Aaron Carter.
That's it.
Yeah, no, he didn't testify at trial, but he has defended Michael.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's correct. But yeah, so the prosecution didn't ask these boys, were you molested? And so Michael's defense attorney, his first three witnesses were these three boys, and they all testified, number one, I was not molested by Michael Jackson. Number two, the prosecution never bothered to ask me if I was molested. They just put these tabloids selling people who owed Michael Jackson money on the stand to make these claims. The case was just so ridiculous. It was just... If it wasn't so tragic, I think it would be comedic.
But the sad thing is, though, as you said earlier, as ridiculous as the case was, it destroyed him even more.
Oh, absolutely, because the media didn't explain much of this at all. I remember them talking about the J.C. Penney thing. So some of it they did explain to the public, but they reported on these allegations as though they were credible, as though, it was just horribly reported. And I think, again, they never explained that the charges had completely changed over the year from when they initiated to when they went to court, that the timeline was just the most absurd thing ever. Like the most important things that would convince people that this is nonsense, they never mentioned. They mentioned, some things like J.C. Penney, but it was just they, for the most part, talked about it as if it was true and it was credible, and it absolutely destroyed his reputation.
I mentioned the Sony breakup because he called Tommy Mottola the devil. He was the CEO of Sony Music. And what's interesting about Tommy is that Tommy was friends with P. Diddy.
Yes, and I think Michael certainly thought that there was a conspiracy, and he talked about it because he owned half of the Sony Music catalog, which was worth a lot of money, like over $1 billion or whatever. And he thought that Sony was trying to weaken him to force him to sell his half of the catalog back to them. So he absolutely felt that those charges, that Sony was somehow involved in pushing these molestation charges against them to try to destroy him, so that they could get their music catalog back. That's what Michael believed.
I don't think he was wrong.
Probably not. Yeah, I think he definitely felt that people were intentionally trying to destroy him. And there's no doubt. And even in a song about the district, he wrote a song about the district attorney in 1995. In the song, he said, I bet he missioned with the CIA. So I think Michael definitely felt that there was a targeted campaign to try to destroy him, probably coming from various sectors of power.
How did nobody pick up on any of this?
Yeah, I think part of it is, one is, like you said, a lot of people don't listen to lyrics, because I think the lyrics in a song gave a lot away, or gave a lot of hints away. I think another part is, to your point, he was different. He did appear strange to a lot of people. He didn't communicate well. He was very shy. So I don't think he really knew how to speak for himself. And he didn't really have the platform either, other than through his music. And I think also that we didn't have the internet back then in the early 90s. We did in the early 2000s, but it wasn't like it is today where you can have all these podcasts and you can kind of speak on these matters much more. So the media landscape, the independent media was much weaker back then as well, which I think, And so at that point, people just listened to what the mainstream press said. And I think it's horrific because it's just, you can see that, like Michael Jackson said, to speculate to break the one you hate. You can see sort of how media can completely destroy an individual and how much power they have.
Well, listen to this, just regarding the Sony thing. So he released Invincible in October 2001, which was his last studio album. And then at that stage, he had already told Sony that he wanted out of his recording contract when it expired. Tommy Mottola, upon hearing this, had lawyer John Branca rewrite contracts to tie Michael Jackson to the label for longer. Sony then cancelled all promotion for Invincible 2 months before release and shelved the single What More Can I Give?
Yes, he was very angry about that because he wrote What More Can I Give to try to sort of unite people after 9/11. It was kind of like We Are the World, like a version of that. And Sony wouldn't release it as a single. They wouldn't promote his album Invincible at all, which Michael was very angry about. So, at the time these 2003 allegations came out, his relationship with Sony was extremely fractured, and he was on the verge of getting out of his contract. And then, of course, all that mess happened with the courts. And I don't think he ever recovered. Like, I don't think he ever recovered from those allegations. He was just so beaten down by them. And so, I know his bodyguards wrote a book and they said, like, if someone would yell child molester in public or something, first they would lie to Michael and say, no, you misheard that. You didn't hear that. Because they knew he would just go into his room for like a week and just like completely shut down because he was so affected by it.
And in your book, you also note that even after he died, the attacks on him didn't stop.
Yeah, so on the 10-year anniversary of his death, which is probably not a coincidence that this documentary came, because usually on the 10-year anniversary of someone's death, you remember their life, you celebrate them. But on the 10 years anniversary of Michael Jackson's death, I would say was probably the largest attempt to cancel him since the 2005 trial. So HBO came out with this ridiculous documentary, Leaving Neverland, and these two men in it, it's kind of a long story, but basically they accused Michael Jackson of molesting them when they were younger. And these are two men who had previously both, defended Michael under, their whole lives, who had testified under oath, that Michael had not done anything to them. And so I'll just kind of try to explain this. So like Wade Robson was the first one to make an accusation. So Wade Robson, his entire life, had been praising Michael Jackson. When Michael Jackson died, he tried to get into the funeral. He did these dance tributes to him. He emailed these TV shows and said, I want to do tributes to Michael Jackson. He wrote that Michael Jackson was like the kindest person he'd ever met. And he really wanted to choreograph the Cirque du Soleil tribute show to Michael Jackson, which was run by the Michael Jackson estate. He even told the media that he got the job, that he was going to be the director of the show. But the Michael Jackson estate decided to hire someone else. And so after that, he came out and he sued the estate for child molestation. So I think he had it seems like he's angry at the estate for not hiring him and maybe angry at Michael Jackson for, not leaving him any money or not, looking out for him or whatever. And Wade actually dated Michael Jackson's niece when he was a teenager. And she kind of, explained that Wade is an opportunist. That's why he was praising Michael like crazy, because he was trying to, profit off Michael's fame. And then when that route dried up and he couldn't get the Cirque du Soleil job and his career was sort of drying up, he went the other route, which is, again, consistent with an opportunist, is to say, well, okay, well, then he molested me, give me some money for that. And that's what it appears to be happening. And then James Safechuck, he saw Wade Robson on TV, and then he claims, oh, I suddenly remembered I was molested by Michael Jackson too. And he also then files a civil lawsuit. And these suits are still pending in the courts. But in their suits, they have to claim that most of their life they didn't know Michael Jackson molested them because of the statute of limitations. So they have to claim they didn't realize until, much later in life that they were molested, and that's why they're coming forward now. But there's egregious lies they told, like in Leaving Neverland. I think the most egregious lie is that James Safechuck talked about how, like, in the late 1980s, in the honeymoon phase of his relationship with Michael Jackson, Michael Jackson would molest him in the Neverland train station. Problem is, the Neverland train station was not built until 1994, when Safechuck was bigger than Michael Jackson. And Safechuck declared under penalty of perjury that all molestation stopped in 1992. And the reason it stopped was because he had gotten too big for Michael Jackson. So how are you getting molested in the late 1980s in a train station that doesn't exist until 1994? So they say like no one will ever know the truth except the two people in the room. Well, we know the truth because the room didn't exist, right? So it's just these kind of like blatant lies that Wade and James have been caught in. And there's other ones, like James claimed that Michael begged him to testify in 2005, which is complete nonsense because Michael didn't even put on a character defense. Like I said, the reason that the other boys were asked to testify is to respond to testimony by these witnesses who claim they were molested. Like no witness came and claimed Safechuck was molested. There was absolutely no reason for him to testify in that trial. So just so many things that they say in Leaving Neverland that are just easily debunked and complete nonsense. But the media ran with it like it was true.
Who in Michael Jackson's circle actually knew the truth?
I think a lot of people knew the truth because I listened to like tons of interviews because back then the media wouldn't really interview people who knew Michael or who knew Michael well. But today there's podcasts that interview people who worked at Neverland, people who worked in the studio with him. And I must have listened to hundreds of those interviews. They all spoke very highly of Michael. They all said he was extremely kind. Not a single one of them thought he was capable of molesting a child. And so no one around him thought he was guilty. After his acquittal, when he came back to Neverland, there's like 100 staff that work at Neverland. They all like held hands together in the air to welcome him back because none of them thought, none of them believed these allegations. And so no one around him believed the allegations. But the problem is the media would give airtime to people that like barely knew Michael, that would make insinuations. And so the public is not aware that no one around Michael took these allegations seriously.
And the media made it look like he was isolated.
Yes, correct. And he was isolated in a lot of ways, but he did have a lot of people he worked with that, really looked up to him and really liked him and thought very highly of him.
Monika, I'm wondering if there's a lesson here. Musicians like to talk about, what they do as art, and art is about expression. I mean, how free are such artists really to express themselves?
No, that's an absolutely brilliant question. And I actually asked that question in the introduction in my book. And I think Michael kind of asked that question as well in his song, They Don't Care About Us. I don't remember his exact words, but he basically asked the question you just asked is like, why am I not free to say what I want to say? I thought your proclamation offered me liberty or something like that, he said in the song. And it is true. So like, because the entertainment industry is very controlled. We always think of the news as being very controlled and we think of the news as propaganda. But the entertainment industry a lot of times is owned by the same companies. It's pushing the same propaganda. And so when you have an artist that isn't towing the line, that's a big problem. So art is like, because John F. Kennedy said, art is the most political, art is political in the most profound sense. So he understood that, right? But I think if you try to get political in your art, you do get shut down. Like you can make people dance, you can make them have fun, that's okay. But as soon as you start actually, impacting culture, or like impacting, getting people to think or really trying to speak your truth, that's when you get shut down. And I think with Michael, it was like he became so famous when he was a kid. So the industry didn't have to worry about him being a threat. He was just a kid. He sang whatever songs he was given. And even when he came out with like Off the Wall and Thriller, those were not, threatening albums or whatnot. But then as he got older and he got more outspoken, he did become a threat, and he wasn't free to do art anymore. He was free to entertain to an extent, but not free to do art.
I was just thinking now, I think Billie Jean is probably one of the greatest songs ever written.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so much of his music is. I think he just had such a unique talent, such an incredible talent.
Do you think he wanted to die?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm sure he, like, because he loved his children, right? So,
It was an
but I
overdose,
think
though.
there was.
Hang on. But it was an overdose, or I say, quote unquote, an overdose. Do you think there might have been malicious activity?
I'm agnostic on that. So basically, what was happening is, so he was preparing to do these concerts in London. And when he performs, when you perform, you get so much adrenaline that you can't calm down after. You can't sleep after. He needs a few days to calm down after each performance, but they wanted him to rehearse every day. He's like, I can't rehearse every day because I can't calm my body down and I can't sleep. And so he tried natural ways that they weren't working. So he finally went to Murray, who gave him the propofol to sleep. But he was first seeing this holistic nurse practitioner who was trying to help him with natural ways. And he told her about the propofol. And she's like, you're absolutely insane. Don't go anywhere near this stuff. It's toxic. Here's all the side effects. But he didn't listen to her. He went with Murray and the propofol. And a couple of days before his death, he was starting to have all these side effects that the nurse had told him about, like half my body is hot, half my body is cold. And he reached out to her. I think she was in Florida or somewhere. She was out of town. And he reached out to her through who at the time was his head of security. This wasn't Michael's normal security. It was the security he had to prep for the concert. So I'm not sure who hired this security. But this guy ended up being Diddy's head of security later. So I don't know what that means, but that's right there is suspicious in and of itself. But in any case, through his head of security, he called this lady and said, I want to see you. Like, I'm having all these side effects you told me about. I really need to see you. So it seemed to me like he was having second thoughts about the propofol, because you don't usually call someone who's castigated you and ask them for help unless you realize that someone was correct. And so anyway, she said she'll be back in town on the 25th, the afternoon of the 25th. Well, he died on the morning of the 25th. So that to me is the strongest evidence. If there was foul play, that to me is the strongest evidence for it because of the timing, because looks like he wants to get off. He's having second thoughts. Now suddenly he dies. But I can also just see it being an accident, because you are playing with fire when you're taking that strong of a drug. Murray didn't have the proper equipment. It is possible that he just messed up. And so I'm sort of agnostic on it. I can see it going either way. But certainly it's a very, very strange death. There's no doubt about that.
He was 50 or something, wasn't he?
Yes, 50.
How old would he have been now?
And it would have been interesting. Oh, go ahead.
He would have been...
he died in 2009, so he would be like 67, I think, or he'd be turning 67 in August, I think. But it would be interesting to see how those London concerts would have went, whether that would have propelled him back into superstardom, or because those things sold out like insane. I mean, I think they were the fastest selling concerts in history. So the public still was, dying to watch him perform. He always really appreciated the people that questioned the media and that didn't buy what the media was saying about him. So I think he'd really appreciate how much more widespread that is today. And that, there are a lot of people who have seen through it, and a lot of people who still absolutely love his music. I think he'd be thrilled to see, because I think this biopic that just came out, I think it's grossed close to $1 billion, or probably will surpass $1 billion.
What's it called?
I think he would, I think it's just called Michael the Movie. His nephew is playing Michael Jackson. It's very positive. And I know it's it's been like one of the top movies in the world the last few weeks. So I think he would be absolutely thrilled that despite all the lies and all the BS, there are still so many out there that love his music and love his art.
Would you say that this movie, is a thriller? That's a terrible joke.
It's a good joke. I enjoyed it. I'm really hopeful that there's going to be a part 2, because the movie ended in the late 1980s, and it kind of hinted that there might be a part 2. And I really think it's important that they do a movie about the allegations and the second part of his life. So I really hope there's a part 2. But I enjoyed the movie. I did enjoy it.
I haven't seen it, so I'm going to make an effort to watch it. Okay, I'm going to come in for a landing here with you, and I'll read one more line from his music. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and then make a change. And I think that's really, really profound, because everything comes back to you first and foremost.
Yeah, and actually he That's from Man in the Mirror. And in his autobiography, he said the philosophy of Man in the Mirror was the same as JFK's philosophy, because that's what JFK said in his peace speech at American University. He said, if you want to stop war, you have to look inward, not outward. And so Michael Jackson is spreading the same message that John F. Kennedy was spreading, which is if you want to make the world a better place, you have to do it yourself. You have to look at what your contributions to conflict, your contributions to, division and to war, and you have to change your own behavior to make the world a better place. And so I think the two of them were very similar in that way. And Michael Jackson saw that similarity, and he called it out himself.
All right, Monika, how can I follow your work?
So I on X, and it's just my name is the handle, and I tend to post clips of JFK speaking every day on there, just various inspirational things that he said. Occasionally I'll post about Michael on there, and then that's the only social media that I'm on.
Substack.
Yeah. Oh, Substack, yes. I forgot about that. I did open a Substack recently, so I do occasionally post an article on there as well. Yes, thank you for that.
All right, Monika Wiesak, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thank you for having me on.